The girl was crouched behind the feed store, hunched low like a frightened creature, trying to disappear into the dirt. The noon sun burned white across the town of Red Butte, and it shone off the smooth skin of her shaved head. Not a strand of hair, not even stubble. Her feet were torn open, bleeding into the dust, and she was digging through a pig trough, desperate enough to chew on whatever scraps she could find. Jonas Pike froze where he stood. In all his wandering years across the frontier, he'd seen cruelty, hunger, and desperation. But this was different. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17. Her clothes were ripped so badly they barely clung to her thin frame. Fresh bruises ringed her jaw. Older ones stained her ribs. Her left side was held stiff, like something inside was broken, something deeper than bone. Jonas raised his hands slowly. "Easy now," he said. Her head snapped up, and then she pressed herself against the wall, shaking so violently that her shoulders hit the boards behind her. Her eyes were dark, hollow, empty of anything except fear. A fear so deep it looked carved into her soul. Jonas eased down to a crouch. Dust settled around him. A warm wind blew across the alley, carrying the smell of hay and horses. "I'm not going to hurt you," he whispered. He reached into his coat and pulled out the last bit of hardtack he had. He held it out in his open palm. No sudden moves. No threat. The girl stared at the bread like it was a trick. A trap. Her eyes flicked between his face and the hardtack, searching for cruelty she'd learned to expect. Her hand lifted. It shook so hard she could barely steady it. Then she grabbed the food and devoured it like a starving wolf pup. Jonas felt something in his chest twist. This wasn't hunger. This was near death. "What happened to you?" he murmured. But she only stared at him, breathing fast, waiting for the moment he would take something from her in return. Footsteps sounded behind him. Jonas stood quickly, turning in one smooth motion. Deputy Raylan Burke rounded the corner with a swagger that came from the wrong kind of power. His hand rested on the butt of his gun as he looked from Jonas to the girl. Well, Burke drawled. "Found our little problem, did you?" Jonas didn't move. The girl shrank behind him like a shadow, was the only shelter she had. Burke's lip curled. "She's been causing trouble all morning. Somebody said they saw a bald Chinese girl stealing from the bakery." "She's hurt," Jonas said. "She needs a doctor." Burke laughed. A hard, ugly laugh that bounced off the walls. "Help? Stranger, you don't know what you're defending. This one ain't but trouble. And folks in this town don't take kindly to anyone protecting her." His words weren't just a warning. They were a threat. Jonas could feel her trembling behind him. Burke stepped closer. "Step away from her, Pike. She's in debt to Mr. Howe. And harboring a thief makes you responsible." Jonas kept his voice even. "What kind of debt?" "The kind that gets settled with work," Burke replied, smirking. "Howe fed her, gave her a place to sleep, patched her up when she came in half dead. She owes him room, board, medicine. She works until it's paid." Jonas had seen this before. Company stores, gambling debts, rigged ledgers designed to chain people forever. Burke's tone turned colder. "And if she can't work, then she starves," Burke said simply. He gestured toward her. "Hell, look at her. Can't speak English. Don't know where she came from. For all we know, she's diseased or touched in the head. Town shouldn't have to feed her." Jonas turned slightly to check the girl. Up close, he saw the cuts on her scalp, not accidental. Someone had shaved her in a hurry with a rough blade. Her arms had small, round scars, the kind that spoke of restraints. Her lips trembled when she met his eyes. "What if I pay her debt?" Jonas said suddenly. Burke blinked, then grinned. "You? Pay her debt? How much?" $50. Plus interest. Jonas's jaw tightened. $50 was a fortune. Designed to be impossible. Designed to keep her trapped. "And if I don't have it right this second?" Burke shrugged. "Then you're on Howe's hook too. You don't like men who owe him. He collects, let's just say aggressively." The girl grabbed Jonas's coat, fingers curling in the fabric, shaking her head desperately. She understood far more than the deputy thought. Burke stepped forward. "Enough talk. She's coming with me." He reached for her arm. What came out of the girl's throat wasn't a scream. It was a broken, animal sound. A long, low wail of pure terror that froze both men in place. She collapsed to her knees, rocking, holding her head. Burke muttered a curse and stepped back. Touched in the head, he said. See? Crazy. Dangerous. Best thing for everyone is to let Hao deal with her. Jonas knelt beside her again. Her tears cut lines through the dirt on her face. She looked like someone expecting to die. I'll find the money, Jonas said softly. Even if it was impossible. Even if he only had $3 to his name. Burke smirked. You've got until sundown. He walked away with a swagger, calling over his shoulder. If you're still with her after that, you'd best start praying. Jonas watched him go. Then he lifted the girl gently to her feet. She winced, unable to stand fully on her injured left leg. We'll figure something out, he whispered. She didn't understand the words, but something in his voice, the tone, the steady calm, reached her. She clung to his arm, and for the first time Jonas Pike realized, whatever happened next, he'd just put a target on both their backs. The girl's weight sagged against Jonas as they moved toward the main street. Her steps were slow, painful, each one a wince. The infection in her feet had spread. He could see the red streaks crawling up her ankles, dangerous, angry lines that warned of fever and death. We'll get you looked at, Jonas murmured, steadying her. But as soon as they stepped into the sunlight, the quiet of the alley vanished. Every head in Red Butte turned. People stopped mid-conversation. Women pulled children behind their skirts. A blacksmith paused mid-hammer, the metal cooling on his anvil. The saloon doors stilled as men leaned out to stare. Whispers rippled like wind through tall grass. That's her. Lord help us, she's diseased. Should have left her where she came from. The girl flinched at every voice. Her grip tightened on Jonas's coat. She moved like she expected someone to strike her from behind. Jonas kept walking. The doctor's office sat at the edge of the street, marked by a painted sign. Dr. Reuben Albright, physician-surgeon. Jonas helped her inside. The room smelled of alcohol, herbs, and a faint trace of tobacco. Dr. Albright, a thin man with gentle gray eyes, looked up from his desk. Then his face fell. Oh, he said quietly. Jonas, I can't treat her. You haven't even looked at her. I don't need to. The doctor rubbed the back of his neck, troubled. Mr. Howe gave strict orders. No care without his consent. Says her account is closed. Jonas pointed at the girl's feet. She's got blood poisoning, Reuben. Those streaks are a fever climbing. I know. The doctor's voice cracked with helpless frustration. If I stitch her, if I clean those wounds, if I even offer a bandage, Howe will have my license pulled. He owns half the county board. You know how it is. You treat everyone, Jonas said. You always have. And I treated her too, Albright whispered. When she first came in, when she was half dead. But Howe called it death. Charged her for every drop of medicine. Now her balance is more than she can ever repay. The girl watched the exchange silently, confused but sensing the refusal. She touched Jonas's sleeve timidly, her eyes pleading. I'm sorry, the doctor said. Truly. They stepped back into the street. Jonas felt a heaviness settle in his chest. Every attempt to help this girl was met with a wall. How's wall? She stumbled again, nearly falling. Jonas scooped her into his arms before she hit the ground. She gasped in fear, hands flying up as if expecting a blow. Easy, he whispered. Just helping you walk. Slowly, she relaxed. Her fingers unclenched from his shirt. A voice called from across the street. Jonas Pike. He turned. A woman in her 50s strode toward them, skirts gathered in fistfuls. She had strong shoulders, steady eyes, and a face softened by kindness rather than age. Eleanor Price, owner of the Red Butte boarding house. Bring her to the back, Mrs. Price said quietly. Now, Jonas didn't question it. He carried the girl behind the boarding house, where laundry flapped on a line and the smell of bread drifted from an open kitchen window. Mrs. Price shut the back gate behind them. Set her down here, she said, pointing to a bench beneath the porch shade. Jonas eased the girl onto it. She winced but didn't cry. Mrs. Price knelt, lifting the girl's foot gently. Lord above. The cuts were deep, angry, swollen. Her skin was split open. Dirt and dried blood clung to the wounds. Infection burned hot beneath her flesh. She needs help, Jonas said. Yes, and she'll get it, Mrs. Price said firmly. But first, you need to hear the truth about this child. Jonas frowned. What truth? Mrs. Price wiped her hands on her apron, looking both furious and heartbroken. She wasn't a thief, she said. She wasn't a vagrant. She wasn't some stray who wandered in. The girl watched Mrs. Price closely. Something in the woman's voice reached her. Tears welled in her eyes, silent, terrified tears. 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Price said, lowering her voice, a wagon train of Chinese laborers passed through town. Railroad workers headed west. One wagon had a broken axle, needed repairs. And in the back of that wagon, she exhaled sharply, was this girl, shackled, in irons. Jonas felt the breath leave his lungs. Shackles, ankle irons, wrist chains, locked inside like cargo. Mrs. Price's voice trembled with anger. The men claimed she was indentured, that her family owed money. Jonas had heard that story 100 times, and not once had it meant anything except slavery. They sold her, Mrs. Price said bitterly. Right here, in this town. The girl lowered her head, tears falling silently on her lap. How bought her? Mrs. Price continued, voice tight. Paid those men in gold. Said he needed help in his business. What kind of help? Jonas asked, already knowing the answer. Mrs. Price didn't speak. She didn't need to. Jonas's stomach turned. The girl fought back, Mrs. Price said. That's why she looks like this. How had her head shaved to mark her as disobedient. Locked her in a back room. Fed her scraps. Beat her when she refused what he wanted. Jonas closed his eyes, jaw tight. 3 nights ago, Mrs. Price continued. A fire broke out behind House Saloon. No one knows how. In the chaos, she escaped. The girl looked up suddenly, grabbing Jonas's sleeve with both hands. She shook her head, pointed toward town in panic. Fear surged in her eyes, raw, immediate. Jonas turned. 2 men were approaching down the alley. One was the scarred man who guarded Howe's establishment. The other was Howe himself. Silk vest, polished boots, cold, expressionless eyes that drifted instantly to the girl. Howe clasped his hands behind his back. Mr. Pike, he said pleasantly, you have something that belongs to me. Mrs. Price stepped forward. She belongs to no one. Howe's smile didn't change. She is indentured. She owes debt. I have papers. Jonas positioned himself between Howe and the girl. What kind of debt? He asked. Howe's expression sharpened. The kind that keeps her alive. She'd be dead if she stayed with you, Jonas said. The scar man stepped forward, reaching toward his gun. Howe lifted a hand to stop him. You misunderstand, Mr. Pike. I saved her. I fed her. I paid for her medicines. But she ran. She stole from me. Jonas felt the girl trembling behind him. Maybe I take over her contract, Jonas said. Maybe her debt becomes mine. Howe's eyes narrowed. You don't have the money. Jonas didn't back down. I'll work it off. Howe's smile vanished. You take responsibility for her. You take responsibility for everything she owes. The girl grabbed Jonas's sleeve, whispering in a trembling voice. Please no. Mrs. Price stepped beside her, protective. Jonas exhaled slowly. He was outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched. But he knew one thing. If he let Howe take her, she'd never be seen again. So he made his choice. No, Jonas said quietly. She's not going with you. Howe's expression turned to ice. Very well, he said. Then you've just made yourself my enemy. Howe's eyes flicked to the girl with a slow, venomous smile, as if he were memorizing her fear, storing it for later. Then he turned, motioned to his scarred enforcer, and the 2 men disappeared around the boarding house. They were not retreating. They were planning. Mrs. Price locked the back gate the moment they were gone. Jonas helped the girl to her feet again. She clung to him, trembling so hard he could feel it through his coat. We need to work fast, Mrs. Price said. Howe doesn't give up anything he thinks he owns. And now he believes you've stolen from him. The girl swallowed hard, her eyes darting everywhere, as if danger hid behind every barrel, every fence post, every flicker of shadow. Jonas crouched, speaking softly. You're safe here. But she wasn't. They all knew that. Mrs. Price touched the girl's cheek gently. "What's your name, child?" The girl hesitated, fear battling instinct. Finally, she whispered, "Lin Yue." The syllables were soft, fragile, and trembling. "Lin Yue," Jonas repeated gently. She blinked, startled by the softness with which he spoke her name, as if she'd forgotten it could be spoken kindly. Mrs. Price squeezed the girl's hand. "Well, Lin Yue, let's see what we can do to keep you alive." Hours later, trouble was already brewing. Jonas had taken Lin Yue into the boarding house kitchen, where Mrs. Price cleaned her wounds with hot water and herbs. Lin Yue clenched the table edge silently, tears slipping down her cheeks, but not a sound escaping her. Jonas had never seen a child endure pain like this, without crying out, without fighting, without even asking for mercy. "Lord," Mrs. Price whispered, "what do they do to you?" Lin Yue didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She stared at the floor, rigid with shame. Jonas couldn't bear it. He knelt beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong," he murmured. At the sound of his voice, Lin Yue's fingers loosened from the table. She lifted her eyes slightly, as if testing whether she dared believe him. "Mrs. Price began applying salve. Lin Yue gasped, sharply, painfully, then clamped her hands over her mouth, terrified to make noise. Jonas gently pulled her hands away. "You don't have to hide every sound," he said. "Not here." The relief that flashed across her face lasted only a second, because outside, down the street, a voice bellowed, "Thorn!" Jonas stiffened. Deputy Caleb Norris. The law, corrupt as a spoiled apple, had arrived. Mrs. Price immediately blew out the kitchen lamp. "Jonas, hide her!" He grabbed Lin Yue's hand and pulled her toward the pantry. The girl limped behind him as fast as she could. Her heart hammered. He felt it through her grip. He opened the pantry door and whispered, "Stay. Don't move." Lin Yue's breath came short, panicked, but she nodded. She pressed herself behind stacked flour sacks, vanishing into shadow. Mrs. Price opened the front door just as Norris pounded on it again. The deputy stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He smelled of whiskey and cheap tobacco. "Well now," Norris drawled, his eyes roaming over the room. "I hear you've been harboring fugitives, Eleanor." Mrs. Price folded her arms. "You hear wrong." "Do I?" Norris stepped further in, his hand resting casually on his revolver. "Seems Jonas Pike took in a runaway girl this morning. One Mr. Howe claims as his legal property. She's a person, not property," Mrs. Price snapped. Norris chuckled. "Chen, show me the contracts." The girl owes 7 years of indenture, and she owes him a pile of money for breaking his trust. Jonas stepped out of the kitchen doorway, jaw tight. "What do you want, Norris?" "Not much," Norris said with a shrug. "Howe wants the girl returned. He's pressing charges, and I got orders to search this place." Jonas moved in front of him. "You're not searching anything." Norris raised a brow. "You stopping me, Pike?" "I am." "You really want this fight?" Norris sneered. "You'll lose. I've got half the town ready to swear that girl's dangerous." "She's not dangerous," Jonas shot back. "She's terrified. That's good enough for me." Norris pushed forward. Jonas blocked him again, palms flat against the deputy's chest. "Norris," he warned, "don't do this." But the deputy grabbed Jonas by the shirt, and everything exploded at once. Jonas slammed Norris into the wall, knocking the wind from him. The deputy swung at Jonas, grazing his jaw. Jonas caught Norris's arm, twisted hard, sending his revolver clattering across the floor. Mrs. Price snatched the gun. "Enough," she barked. Norris froze, panting, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "You're making a big mistake," he spat. "Howe owns this town. The sheriff won't stand against him. The judge owes him money. You cross him, you cross all of us." Jonas wiped blood from his lip. "Then all of you can go to hell." Norris glared at him, hatred burning deep. "This isn't over, Pike," he hissed. "By sundown, you'll wish you never laid eyes on that girl." He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to shake the walls. Mrs. Price locked it again. Jonas leaned against the counter, breathing hard. From the pantry, a small trembling voice whispered, "Jonas?" He opened the door. Lin Yue stood there, tears streaking her face, clutching the flour sack for support. She limped toward him, her steps uneven and scared. Jonas knelt and opened his arms without thinking. She fell into them, small, shaking, and silent. He held her gently. "You're safe," he murmured. "I promise. You're safe." But over her shoulder, Mrs. Price met his eyes. Fear flickered there, because both of them knew Jonas's promise might be the first one he ever made that could get him killed. The sun dipped low over Dry Creek, casting long orange streaks across the dusty street. The town looked calm from the outside, lanterns being lit, horses drinking at troughs, merchants closing their doors. But Jonas Pike knew better. Fear had a pulse, and tonight it beat through the whole damn town. Inside Mrs. Price's boarding house, the air felt tight, heavy, waiting. Jonas sat near the front window, watching every shadow, every passing step. His jaw ached from where Norris had clipped him, but that was the least of his concerns. Lin Yue sat curled on a chair by the stove, wrapped in a quilt. Her eyes stayed fixed on Jonas, as if he was the only solid thing left in a world that wouldn't stop spinning. Mrs. Price set a cup of broth in front of the girl. "You need strength," she said gently. Lin Yue looked from the bowl to Mrs. Price, then back to Jonas, unsure if she was truly allowed to eat. Jonas nodded. She lifted the cup with both hands and drank slowly. Every sip hurt Jonas to watch, like each swallow was teaching her how to be human again. Mrs. Price sank into a chair. "Jonas," she murmured, "Hal isn't going to wait until morning." Jonas rubbed a hand over his face. "I know. He won't come alone. I know. And the men he brings won't take her alive." Jonas looked at Lin Yue. She was watching the fire crackle in the stove, shoulders still trembling beneath the quilt. "I know," he whispered. A sharp knock cut through the silence. Mrs. Price startled. Lin Yue froze. Jonas reached for his revolver. Another knock, then a voice. "Pike, open up." It wasn't Norris. It was deeper, older, and full of a quiet authority Jonas hadn't heard in this town before. Jonas motioned for Mrs. Price to stay back and opened the door slowly. Standing on the porch was a man Jonas hadn't seen before. Tall, gray-bearded, broad as a barn door, with calm eyes that didn't flinch. He wore a deputy star, but not from this county. Behind him stood two others, similarly weathered, armed, and steady. "We're looking for a Jonas Pike," the man said. "That depends on who's asking." The man reached into his coat and produced a badge. "A real one. Federal issue. Name's Marshal Ezra Calder," he said. "These are my men, Ruggles and Hanlon. We're with the Territorial Bureau." Mrs. Price's breath caught. Jonas didn't lower his gun. "What do you want?" he asked. "We're tracking a human trafficking ring that runs through mining and railroad towns across the territory." Calder's voice didn't waver. "Your visitor today, Mr. Howe, happens to sit right in the middle of it." Jonas let that sink in. Slowly, he lowered his revolver. Mrs. Price stepped forward hesitant. "How did you know to come here?" "Telegram," Calder replied. "From a Mrs. Eleanor Price." She stiffened. "I sent it this afternoon," she admitted. "After Jonas found Lin Yue. I didn't know if help would come." "It did," Calder said, "and faster than you think." Ruggles stepped forward. "We've been moving across towns, gathering names. Witnesses. Victims." He nodded toward the room. "The girl. She's one of them, isn't she?" Lin Yue shrank behind Jonas, terrified of these new strangers. Calder softened his tone immediately. "We're not here to hurt her," he said. "We're here because she deserves justice." Jonas looked at Calder hard. "You show up awful convenient, Marshal. So does trouble." Jonas's grip tightened around the door. Calder continued, voice low. "How is men on the way?" "They're planning to surround this building and take the girl by force. We intercepted a conversation outside the saloon." Mrs. Price covered her mouth. "How many?" Jonas asked. 7, Calder said. "Could be more coming." Jonas exhaled slowly. "We can't fight that many in a house full of civilians." "We won't," Calder replied. "We move the girl. Quietly. Now." Lin Yue rose from the chair, trembling hard. "No," she whispered. "No go with stranger. No go with man. Please no more." Her voice cracked. Fresh panic flooded her eyes. Jonas crouched beside her. "You don't have to be afraid," he whispered. "These men, they're real law. They're here to help you." Lin Yue backed away, hands shaking. "No, no, no trust. Men lie. Men hurt." Calder watched her, not with impatience, but with the sadness of someone who'd seen this too many times. He removed his hat and knelt down, leveling himself with the girl. "I won't touch you," he said gently. "But I want you to hear something, child." Lin Yue stared at him, breathing fast. "This job, it's taken me across 6 states. I buried too many girls whose names I never learned." His voice grew heavier. "Too many children no one came for. Too many who died because we didn't reach them fast enough." Lin Yue blinked, confused but listening. Calder placed his hat on the floor in front of him, open side up. A gesture of humility. A gesture of surrender. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said softly. "I'm here because someone finally stood up for you. And because you deserve a life where no man can ever own you again." Lin Yue stared at the hat, at the kneeling marshal, at Jonas. Her eyes filled with tears, slow, trembling, frightened tears that slid silently down her face. Finally, she whispered, "You help me?" Calder nodded once. "With everything I have." Jonas gently touched her arm. "We go together," he said. "All 3 of us. Mrs. Price will stay safe here with these marshals guarding the boarding house once we're out." Lin Yue looked between them, fear and fragile hope wrestling inside her. Then she nodded, a small, shaking nod. "Yes," she whispered. "Go." They didn't make it to the back door. Shouts erupted outside. Boots pounded across dirt. Glass shattered on the front porch. Then a familiar, furious voice. "Pike, bring me the girl, or this whole damn building comes down." Jonas's blood ran cold. How it arrived? With twice as many men as Calder expected. The marshal pulled out his revolver. Ruggles and Hamlin drew theirs. Mrs. Price blew out the final lamp. Jonas grabbed Lin Yue's hand. Her pulse hammered against his fingers. He looked at Calder. "Marshal, what now?" Calder cocked his gun. "Our plan just changed." Boots thundered around the house. Voices shouted orders. Metal scraped. A rifle was being loaded. Inside, the world held its breath. Calder narrowed his eyes. "We hold the line," he said softly. "Long enough for that girl to live." Jonas stepped between Lin Yue and the windows. And in the darkness, with danger closing in from all sides, he felt her tiny hand tighten around his. The first gunshot split the night like lightning. Jonas shoved Lin Yue behind the heavy kitchen table as glass shattered across the floor. Mrs. Price ducked low, covering her ears as another bullet tore through the front window frame. Marshal Calder didn't flinch. "Positions," he barked. Ruggles took the far corner. Hamlin moved to the doorframe, steady but tense. Calder himself stood in the center of the room, unshakable as a stone cliff. Outside, Howe's voice roared. "Bring out the girl, Pike. The longer you drag this out, the worse it gets for all of you." His men hooted and jeered. Jonas clenched his jaw. Lin Yue trembled beneath the table, hands pressed over her ears, tears streaking her cheeks. But she didn't scream. She didn't run. She endured, like someone who'd endured too much already. Calder fired a single warning shot through the shattered window. "Next one goes into his skull," he called out. A hush fell over the yard, then angry cursing. Jonas crawled beside Lin Yue. "You stay low," he whispered. "Don't move until I say." She grabbed his wrist, her grip desperate, almost painful. "You no leave," she begged. "No leave me." Jonas touched her cheek gently. "I won't. I promise." Boom! The entire back wall shook. Mrs. Price gasped. "They've got a ram," she cried. Calder cursed under his breath. "Damn it. They're going to breach." Hamlin reloaded. Ruggles checked the back hall. Another boom. Wood cracked. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Calder turned to Jonas. "Window. East alley. You get her out." Jonas froze. "What about you?" "We hold them here," Calder said firmly. "Long as we can. You'll be outnumbered 10-3. Calder's eyes were calm. "Son, I've been outnumbered since the day I first pinned on a badge." Another thunderous hit. The back wall splintered. "Go," Calder ordered. Jonas squeezed Lin Yue's hand. It's time. She shook her head violently. No, I don't want to go alone. You won't be alone, Jonas said. I'm right behind you. Pike, Calder barked. Move. Jonas pulled Lin Yue through the kitchen toward the east window. Mrs. Price reached out and clasped the girl's shoulder. Be brave, sweetheart, she whispered. You deserve a life after this. But before Jonas could lift the window, Howe's men fired from the alley. A bullet tore into the windowsill. Jonas ducked back. Damn, 2 men out there, he hissed. Calder shouted from the other room. Try the cellar. Mrs. Price pointed to a small trap door half hidden beneath a rug. Hurry, they'll breach any second. Jonas ripped the rug aside, hauled the trap door open, and guided Lin Yue down the narrow wooden steps. Her hands shook so violently she nearly fell. Careful, Jonas murmured, holding her steady. From above, the front door exploded inward. Gunfire erupted. Calder shouted, Hold the line. Hamlin returned fire. Ruggles yelled something Jonas couldn't make out. Jonas closed the trap door above them, plunging the cellar into darkness. Lin Yue clung to him, her breath ragged. Why they chase me? She whispered through shaking sobs. Why no stop? Jonas ran a hand down her back, trying to calm her. Because men like Hal think fear is stronger than people. But they're wrong. We're getting you out of this. Jonas, I'm so scared. I know, but scared doesn't mean weak. Above them, another deafening shot. A crash. Furniture overturning. Calder's voice boomed. Fall back to the stairs. We need to move, Jonas whispered. He led Lin Yue across the cellar toward the small side door that opened onto the creek bed. Mrs. Price had used it for storing winter barrels. He shoved the heavy latch. Nothing. It was jammed. Jonas gritted his teeth and yanked harder. Still jammed. Behind them, boots pounded overhead. A scream cut off abruptly. Jonas couldn't tell whose. Then Hal's furious voice. Find the trapdoor. Lin Yue whimpered. Jonas grabbed a hammer from a tool shelf and smashed the door latch. Once. Twice. A third, the latch snapped. Cold night air seeped through. Jonas pushed the small door open and ushered Lin Yue outside. The creek behind the boarding house was shallow but quick-moving. Reeds swayed in the wind. Moonlight shimmered on the water's surface. Jonas pointed downstream. That way. It'll hide our tracks. He stepped through after her, but a gun cocked behind them. Jonas froze. Slowly, he turned. Hal stood in the cellar doorway, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. His face was pure fury. You run far, Hal said coldly, but not far enough. Lin Yue stumbled backward. No. Jonas stepped in front of her, gun raised. Ow, he said. It's over. No. Hal pointed his pistol directly at Lin Yue. It began now. Jonas fired first, but Hal dove aside at the last second. Jonas's bullet smashed the lantern. Flames erupted across the cellar steps. Smoke billowed. Wood cracked. Heat roared up into the room. Hal lunged out of the smoke and tackled Jonas into the creek bed. The gun flew from Jonas's hand. You take my property. Hal snarled, landing a brutal punch into Jonas's ribs. You think you hero? You nothing. Jonas fought back hard, slamming Hal's wrist against a rock until the pistol fell from his grip. They grappled in the creek, water splashing around them. Fists, elbows, grit, mud, both men breathless, furious, desperate. Hal wrapped both hands around Jonas's throat. You die now, he hissed. Jonas's vision darkened. Lin Yue screamed. And then, in a move Jonas never expected, Lin Yue leapt onto Hal's back. Her small hands clawed at his face, her nails tearing skin. Hal roared in pain, releasing Jonas. Jonas gasped for air. Lin Yue clung to Hal's shoulders with all the strength in her fragile body, until Hal hurled her off. She hit the creek bank hard, crying out. Hal turned toward her, murder in his eyes. Jonas surged up with a broken tree limb and swung it with everything he had. It crashed across Hal's skull. The man collapsed, face first, unmoving. Jonas staggered, chest heaving. The cellar behind them was engulfed in flames now. Voices shouted on the surface. Calder's men forcing Hal's gang to retreat. Jonas knelt by Lin Yue. She was shaking, bruised, exhausted. but alive. Jonas touched her cheek. You saved me, he whispered. Lin Yue started to cry, clutching his shirt. No, she sobbed. You saved me first. He pulled her into his arms as distant gunshots faded, replaced by the crackle of flames and the rushing creek. For the first time since he'd found her behind that general store, Lin Yue didn't look afraid. Only relieved. Only human. Only alive. Jonas held her closer as night grew quiet again. The fight wasn't finished. How wasn't finished? Justice wasn't finished. But together, they had survived the darkest hour. The fire took nearly the whole back half of the boarding house. By sunrise, only a blackened frame remained where the kitchen and cellar had been. Smoke rose in slow spirals into the pale morning sky, drifting over Creekside like a funeral veil. Jonas stood beside Lin Yue near the creek bank. Both wrapped in blankets Mrs. Price had scrounged from a neighbor. Calder approached them with a limp in his step, soot on his coat, and a cut above his eyebrow, but alive. The gang scattered, Calder reported. 2 got away. 3 we got tied up. And how? He looked at Jonas. Jonas swallowed. He's alive. Barely, Calder replied. Dr. Ambrose says he'll live. Long enough to stand trial. Lin Yue shivered at the name. Jonas touched her shoulder gently. You're safe. He won't ever touch you again. Calder nodded toward the burned ruins of the boarding house. That fire could have killed all of us. But it's going to do something else instead. Jonas frowned. What's that? Calder tapped the stack of papers Mrs. Price had saved from the cellar. The list of names Lin Yue had hidden. Your girl's testimony, plus this list? It's a hammer. Once the circuit judge sees what how's been running, and who's been helping him, this whole operation comes crashing down. Mrs. Price joined them. Her voice warmed despite the exhaustion in her eyes. And the town knows now. They saw who fired first. They heard what Howe screamed at the marshals. Folks aren't confused anymore. If they were ever blind, they aren't anymore. Calder set a hand on Jonas's shoulder. You did it, Pike. You got her out. Now you both get a fresh start. Jonas wasn't sure what a fresh start looked like. He glanced at Lin Yue. She was staring at her feet, bandaged, healing, but still tender, peeking from beneath the hem of Mrs. Price's borrowed dress. Her hair, the faintest shadow of stubble now, gleamed in the early morning light. Jonas knelt in front of her. You hurt anywhere? He asked softly. Lin Yue shook her head. Only tired. Mrs. Price dabbed her eyes. Let's get you both back inside. What's left of it, anyway? And we'll find you a new place once the town comes together to rebuild. The girl hesitated before taking a step. Then, Jonas, she whispered, tugging lightly on his sleeve. What happened to me now? He didn't have to think long. That depends on what you want, he said gently. You choose now. Your life, your path. She blinked slowly, her eyes still swollen from smoke and grief, but searching his face with growing trust. You stay? She asked. You stay with me? Jonas let out a breath, slow and steady. He hadn't had anything to call his own in years. No home, no roots, no reason to plant his boots in one place for more than a night or two. But standing here in this creek bed with this brave, broken, fighting girl beside him, he realized he finally did. If that's what you want, Jonas said, voice thick with emotion, then yes. I'll stay. Lin Yue didn't smile. Not quite, but something softer passed over her face. A quiet acceptance. A small beginning. Mrs. Price clasped her hands with a gasp. Oh, child, you deserve more kindness than this whole town could give in a lifetime. 1 year later, Creekside didn't look the same. The old boarding house was rebuilt, bigger, stronger, painted a warm wheat yellow that caught the afternoon sunlight. A garden lined the back fence, small at first, but growing tall and healthy under Lin Yue's care. Townsfolk often wandered by for fresh vegetables, herbs, or just to talk to the shy Chinese girl who kept everything alive. She wasn't bald anymore. Her hair now fell in soft black layers to her shoulders. She wasn't barefoot anymore. Mrs. Price bought her sturdy leather shoes from Canyon Ridge. She wasn't silent anymore. She spoke English gently, carefully, with a quiet confidence that made people lean in just to hear her. And she wasn't hunted anymore. The men who once chased her now sat in prison cells across 3 counties. On the porch, Jonas hammered planks into a new handrail. He wore a deputy's badge now, sworn in by Judge Yarborough after Calder retired. He turned when Lin Yue stepped outside, holding 2 cups of tea. "Break time," she said, smiling. Jonas accepted a cup as she sat beside him. She breathed in the evening air, the scent of pine, the far-off splash of the creek, the soft murmur of the rebuilt town. "You okay?" Jonas asked. She nodded. I have peace now. Before, no peace. Only pain. Only running. But now," she touched her chest, "I feel home." Jonas looked at her, at everything she had rebuilt from ashes. "You did this," he said. "All of it. You survived. You walked through hell and came out stronger than anyone had the right to expect." Lin Yue's eyes softened. "No," she whispered. "Not alone." And for the first time since he'd met her behind that general store, ragged, shaved, terrified, she reached out and took Jonas's hand without trembling. Not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of choice, of trust, of a life she finally owned. Jonas squeezed her hand back. "You ready for dinner?" he asked gently. Lin Yue nodded, and the 2 of them rose to their feet. Behind them, the rebuilt boarding house glowed warm in the evening light, like a lighthouse after a long storm. And at last, after all the fire, after all the running, after all the darkness, she walked inside on her own 2 feet. Safe, free, alive.